Have you ever held something broken in your hands and felt like it wasn't worth keeping? I'm your host, Danielle Zapchenk, and I am thrilled you're back with me again on the Parable Podcast. Joining me is ministry leader, author, and speaker, Jess Basson. Jess shares with us today how God repeatedly washes over us with kindness and goodness.
In South Africa, we don't have Christian TV and Christian radio and Christian magazines and Christian whatever. And whereas here, there's this big machine of Christianity. And I've been challenged to say, we don't follow Christian, we follow Jesus.
Here's my conversation with Jess Basson. I'm excited to introduce you to a new friend of mine, Jess Basson. We work together at Women's Speaker Collective. And Jess, welcome.
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
If you haven't noticed, Jess is from South Africa, now living in Colorado.
That's right.
Yeah. Beautiful accent. I love it so much. I did have a college professor that she grew up in South Africa. So anytime I hear that accent, I'm just reminded of Professor Fleming. So
I'm trying to keep it. I don't want to lose it. And now at this time of year, I'm like, it's not fall, it's autumn, Jess. Just try and keep your words, keep your accent.
I grew up in Wisconsin, and so I don't even think about that. I am in the Chicago area now, and people just say all the time, oh, wow, you must be from Wisconsin. And you just don't realize it. It's just your natural personality of who you are, but it cracks me up all the time. What was the jump? What was the reasoning from South Africa to Colorado for you and your husband and your family?
We had been in full-time ministry in South Africa for about 16 years. Mm-hmm. And we were on staff at a big multi-campus megachurch kind of vibe. And we just started to feel like God wanted us to do something new.
Yeah.
And the way we kind of explained it and wrestled with it was there were three ways that our time at that church would end. The one was that we would clock out at 65, and say, well, I worked at this one place for 45 years,
Yeah.
The other option is that there's some awful implosion, some kind of breakdown between us, in the church, an unhealthy ending. Or the third option was, well, we're just going to be doing something new for a season of our lives and go on an adventure. And we felt like that first one just wasn't us. We're a very adventurous family. We've always traveled. I've lived in London. I've lived in Canada. I've lived in America before we were on staff there. And it really was a sense of adventure that God called us. We didn't know where, we didn't know what. And that is a long story of how that unfolded. But all I can say is that it's a little bit like a pregnancy, right? Yeah. There's this idea, this conception, and you think about it, but then you just carry on with your normal life and you just kind of go through the motions. But this idea kind of starts to grow, takes up more room in your life until eventually you can't ignore it. And you're like, oh, wait, something new is going to be birthed. Yeah. And so that was kind of the process for us in arriving in Colorado.
Was Colorado pretty distinct for you guys? Was that an obvious choice, or was it really hard to discern where to go next?
We didn't really know how to approach it. South Africa is a much smaller country. Everyone kind of knows each other in church world. So we were just I don't know, do we apply for jobs? We didn't know if God was preparing us for an opportunity or saying, hey, go look for something.
Yeah.
So we kind of stumbled into the whole recruitment sites and, consultants, and we had never dabbled in any of that before. What it really came down to was finding a place where the vision of the church we would be joining and our hearts, the DNA was a good match. So I had my bias around where we would end up. Mm-hmm. At one point, Tom was looking at a church in rural Michigan or something. And I was like, Jesus is going to have to speak to me very clear to leave my tropical beaches of South Africa to go to a rural. But we ended up here, honestly, just based on the church that God led us to. And I every day say to myself, I can't believe I get to live here. I can't believe this is where we ended up, because it was not a variable. Yeah. It wasn't a factor to say, hey, we'd love to live in Denver. Mm-hmm. So that is just the grace of God, to be honest.
I mean, you said there's tropical beaches. Is there anything else about South Africa that you're like, oh, there is this grieving process, or things that you really miss about that area that you pastored in for so long?
I think I miss what most people miss when they leave a place they've lived for a long time, which is just context and history.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like you walk into a coffee shop and you're like, hey, and you see people like whether you went to high school with them or you know them from church or you've just been in that coffee shop enough time to know the barista's name. Like, I do miss feeling rooted into a community. I miss having friends and relationship outside of church. Like we had so much of that having lived in the city for so long. Whereas here our world feels like a little bit of a bubble.
Yeah.
Oh, I miss the beach a lot. But we're very lucky we live somewhere geographically beautiful. And I miss my garden, Danielle. Like I lived in literally like a tropical environment where you could like break a stick and put it in the ground and it would grow. And it was like just very lush and green. And I really miss like getting my hands dirty in the yard and gardening. And Colorado, I'm like, I don't know how to plant anything at this altitude.
Oh my gosh. You had mentioned in one of your posts through Women Speaker Collective, I thought this was really interesting because of your transition to Colorado, you are kind of like on this forced hold. You can't work right now if it's a visa thing or however this works. And so it feels off. Like it feels like you're in your 40s. You said you feel like you should be in your prime. And here you are on this forced hold. I'd love for you to speak into that because there's so many people that I think can resonate with that.
Has been a big transition. The circumstances are that I'm on a spousal visa. So my husband got a job and he got a work permit to work in the United States. And the boys and I are on these like dependent work permits. So I don't have a social security number. I can't open a bank account. I can't, like I'm just here temporarily, really, in terms of my status. I think whatever the reason is in someone's life, it makes you realize where your identity has been. I was a preaching pastor. I had the dream job. All I did was prepare and preach sermons. Like if you've been in ministry and that's your gift, like you'll know like that's a spoil. And I'm not a very domestic stay-at-home mom type. I never have been. So yeah, I really had to wrestle with, okay, what is work? What gives me meaning and value? And you think you know that stuff till the rug gets pulled out from underneath you. But it's been good. Like I'm learning how to be more patient, which is not a quality I have. I don't have like a genetic wiring for patience. I'm like, let's go, let's do it. Come on, let's go. And I'm actually excited to see the kind of person I am when my environment changes, because I know I've had to change.
Yeah.
And it's going to be interesting to see the kind of Jess that shows up when life gets busy again.
We both have 11-year-olds, and I saw this post on your Instagram because that's where I find out most information about people. Your son, like there was this like thing that he did. I don't know if it was for his birthday, but it was like entering into manhood. And I would just love to know more about this. Should I be doing this with my own son? You know?
It's interesting that that post has had a lot of interest, and I think it really has touched something in the parent's heart.
Yeah.
But for some time, actually, a lot of it came from my reading of Richard Rohr. It's just like the missing of rites of passage, of ritual in our Western culture. And I was a youth pastor for a really long time, and I would see how young people need to initiate themselves into adulthood. And there are cultures all over the world, and South Africa has a number of different cultures, languages, tribes where they have initiation as part of their heritage and the way that they still practice today. So I did get to see some of that. But we were like, you know, this is why we end up with adolescents in adult bodies, is because there are not initiations and rites of passage that say you are now a woman, you are now a man, and this is what that means. So Tom, my husband, and I had been chewing on that for a while our kids were still small. We didn't really know what it would look like. But then Tom read a book called The Intentional Father by John Tyson, and it's aimed at dads, and he only has a son. So it can come across a little male, but he does say, like, if I had a daughter, I would be doing this with them, and you can contextualize it. But basically, the transition from boyhood to manhood in the case of our sons would be from comfort to discomfort, from selfishness to service, a couple of other of those. So about a month after Will's 13th birthday, we planned a day of initiation for him. So he's a runner. And so he ran the furthest he's ever run. You know, it has to be hard. So he ran around a reservoir in our neighborhood. But what we did was we asked significant men in his life to be posted at different places along the reservoir. And then at each place, they would do an activity with him, share a lesson with him. And really the metaphor and the lesson we wanted to teach him was this life is going to be hard and you're going to go on journeys, but you'll never be alone. And there will be people along the way who will be there to cheer you on, to help you. They can't do the race for you, but they'll do it with you. One of our friends met him at an archery field, I guess, and did and gave him like this hectic bow. I'm a little bit like, wow, you could kill something with that. But he did a talk about like aiming for your goals and what is the target that you want. My dad met him on the side of the river and did a thing with the power of 3, just the Trinity and God. And then his little brother met him on a bicycle and kind of brought him home. Yeah. And the metaphor that I used with him the night before, we had like an initiation dinner with him, just with family. And I said to him, my boy, this house is not your home. We are your home. People are your home. South Africa is not your home. America is not your home. And the thing about home is it's like base camp. Yeah. You can go climb mountains and go on adventures. And some of those mountains you'll climb with dad or with me, with your brother, with your friends. But base camp is where you come to refuel. Base camp is where you return to rest and to be cared for. And so no matter where you go, no matter why you go, we will always be your home. And so he finished off his run around the reservoir by coming home back to base camp. He did an ice bath where he had to do an ice plunge for a minute. It's the longest he's ever been in there. And when he got out, he had a little cry. It was hard. But, we can tell him now, you can do hard things. Yeah. And we will be here to cheer you on.
Gosh, I think that's like stunning. I think you need to package this and like just say I think so many students, I've worked with youth groups before and just like having a 14 and 11-year-old now, like I feel like those pieces, I just feel sad. Like they don't have parents, active adults in their life that are just cheering them on, giving them those words of wisdom.
And the research shows that a lot of kids will self-initiate if they're not initiated by adults, which is where you get the wild, drunken college frat, so like this thing of like, how do I know I'm up for this? Like, how do I know I have what it takes? And they'll look for something or someone to cue them that message.
So good, Jess. I mean, we could end it here. But this whole podcast is really about hearing people's stories and how you've seen God's hand on your life, and maybe not in the moment, but afterwards reflecting on it, you can see, wow, he was walking with me every step of the way. So Jess, what is the story that you would like to share with us today?
I'm so glad you used that phrase, he was walking with me, because I wanted to share a little bit about that tropical beach that I lived on when we lived in Durban, South Africa. We lived about 5 minutes away from a really wild beach. Like it wasn't really a beach you would go to swim in. There were no lifeguards and surfers and scuba divers and fishermen. That's who you'd find on that beach. And really big shore break. So kind of those steep beaches where the shore break kind of pounds the sand. We used to call it Backwash Bay. I don't know what it was really called, but that's what we called it. And for the 4 years that we lived along that beach, I started to collect sea glass. So, I mean, your listeners won't be able to see it, but you could hear it. Yeah. As I was walking, would find these pieces of glass that came from beer bottles, just glass that's been in the sea for ages. And it was smooth. They're like these gems. They're so smooth and slightly opaque and just these beautiful, misty little treasures that I would find on the beach. And I would collect them, just pick them up, whether it was a quick swim or we used to take the boys down for a rumble in the afternoons when they were wild and silly and just let them roll down the dunes. I was always collecting sea glass, bringing it home. Now one day I came home from the beach. I had a handful of sea glass in my pocket, and I walked into our kitchen, and there was just a mess everywhere. A troop of monkeys that live in our neighborhood had come in through the window, which is not uncommon, and they had smashed up. They get into the sugar bowl and into your pantry, and they rip open packets, but they had smashed a bunch of wine glasses that I had just washed and were sitting by the sink. And of course, I'm like furious. There's just this massive mess. There's razor sharp, tiny little pieces of glass everywhere. I'm yelling at the boys like, don't come in, stay outside. I'm trying to sweep up the glass, and I'm picking it up and cutting myself. And I looked down at this glass in my hand, and it was so different from the glass in my pocket. And I looked at this glass, and I'm not so spiritual and, self-aware that I have these amazing moments of contemplation every day. But this time it's like God broke through my nonsense. And I felt like when I looked at these really dangerous, painful, messy pieces of glass in my hand, I felt like God was almost saying to me, Jess, you know what it's like to hold something broken. You know what it's like to pick things up and think, oh my gosh, like what a waste. This is never going to be useful. Like, in no ways you would glue a piece of a wine glass back together. Like it's trash. This is what it looks like up close. And I think sometimes, some of us, we hold on to these things in our hands, even though they could cut us and hurt us. We like walk around with these broken things in our hands. And I felt like God said, that's the before, but in your other pocket is the after. Like I can actually turn something broken into something beautiful. And I'd heard that before, but it was such a visceral, tangible picture of something that is broken, and yet a picture of how it can be smoothed out. Like the kindness and the goodness of God just washing over brokenness, repeatedly washing over brokenness. It can turn it into like a treasure, like something, a collectible, and it's not the same. It doesn't do what it used to do, but it is so exquisite. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that if we paused, each of us, and we could listen to each other's stories right now, we'd all have a story of something that just feels like too far gone, too sharp, too hurtful to ever be beautiful. So that was kind of this moment that I had. At the time, I was walking with a friend who loved Jesus, but could not find a home in the church. And the church is something for me that can be those two pieces of glass. Yeah. Like I said, I've been in ministry for 16 years. I love the church. She's like my sister, I grew up with her. I know her really well. She's really annoying. Couldn't live without her. Sometimes I want to yell at her and tell her to leave me alone, like get out of my room, but mostly she's family. Like can't imagine life without her. Like that's how I feel about church. And this friend of mine had basically said, I'm done. Like I can't be a Christ follower because of the way the church treats people like me. And I was walking along that same beach, and I was so angry, Danielle. I was furious. I was like, God, like, how can she be treated this way by your bride? This special, institution, body, system. And I think sometimes those pieces of glass in our hands are not just experiences we've had as people, but they're systems of this world that oppress and hurt their institutions. And I was so mad. I felt like, you know what? In centuries, we're going to look back on this time and we're going to be like, look how the church missed the point again, And in that moment, I remembered Psalm 23, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. And I've always kind of wondered what what the picture is that God wants us to have, like, follow me. Like, what is goodness and mercy doing behind me? I'm like, what are you doing back there? Yeah. Like, I need you up here, like, with me now, or even better, like, out in the front, clearing the way. Like, God, what are you doing back there with goodness and mercy? Yeah. And this is when it all kind of came together for me. I felt like God was like, that mess behind you, like that wake of destruction that sometimes the church leaves? My goodness and my mercy is just rolling over it. And that's what he's doing back there. He's smoothing it out. Yeah. He's cleaning it up. He's turning that broken into beautiful. And so that sea glass, as I was walking along the beach and I was thinking of my friend and wrestling with about like why something beautiful can break so many people, I felt like God reminded me that sometimes a piece of glass needs a little bit longer in the shore. You know, often when I was walking, I'd pick up a piece and it was still sharp. It was still clear. It hadn't gone that like misty, opaque color. And I knew, oh, this needs more time. Like this actually needs more time in the wildness of creation. It needs more time to be rolled around and smoothed out. And that God's love is like this wave that's crashing over and over and over and over. And these pieces of glass, they have like this brokenness of humanity just in their very nature, but they also have I almost want to say the healing power of the Creator is what fixes them and makes them beautiful. So that metaphor has stayed with me. Like that's the parable that whenever I feel overwhelmed by something in my own hands that's really messy and broken, or when I feel really angry about this world, whether it's oppression or politics or injustice, I just remind myself that His goodness and mercy is following us. Like He's cleaning up, He's smoothing out, and He's making something beautiful.
Yeah, that's a beautiful picture, Jess. And just to like have that image in our mind, I think it takes us sometimes like a long time to reflect and get all those things connected together. But I love the way how that played out. I have a girlfriend who I've known for some time. I mean, she was like providential in my own faith. And as of today, I mean, I don't think she cares at all. You know, there was a complete divide because of something. What would your encouragement be with someone, as we're a friend, walking along someone who the church has hurt her, the church has hurt them, and it's just, there's a lot of pain there. Like, how do we continue to walk alongside them and provide them hope?
I know for me, what's helped me when I'm feeling like maybe your friend does, the people that I've trusted are the ones who don't try and fix it for me and don't try and talk me out of it.
Yeah.
You know, there's that companionship. Like, again, my mind goes to that beach where there's companionship that is faithful and keeps showing up. And like the consistency is, again, like the metaphor of a piece of glass is it's the rub, like the repetitive rub that slowly smooths things out. I've found that's been soothing for me, and how I've tried to treat those in my life who've been hurt by the church very carefully, like depending on where they are on their journey. I try and make it about Jesus. You know, I really try and hone in on Jesus in my own walk, because I hope that's what overflows to her. And like I've been so challenged lately, especially moving from South Africa to America, where you kind of have this like American military industrial Christian complex. Like in South Africa, we don't have Christian TV and Christian radio and Christian magazines and Christian whatever. And like, whereas here there's like this big machine of Christianity. And I've been challenged to say like, we don't follow Christian, we follow Jesus. Yeah. And so even like just remembering that personally and hoping that a friend or someone that I'm like caring with or in relationship would notice that too. And I don't know, I think again, this metaphor has freed me from trying to like redeem the church for someone else. Like only God can do that. Like I can't smooth out broken glass. Only God can do that. I'm not going to try and glue wine glasses back together. So it's not my job to redeem someone else's circumstances, but I can participate in doing better going forward. Like the past, God, you got to wash your goodness and mercy over that. But going forward, how can we like do less damage? Yeah.
Just when you think back over your life, you'd had the contrast of the before glass and the after glass. Is there something that comes to mind for you personally where God has continually washed over you, where the monkeys have come and gone and He's just there over and over, and it has really transformed you?
Such a good question. I hope there's always something, but the one that was very defining, probably because of how much glass it broke, was I lived with undiagnosed ADHD until I was, I think I was diagnosed at the age of 36.
Okay.
And that really created a big mess in my life, not knowing how to explain why I was the way I was.
Yeah.
And so the story I told myself, like as I got older, as my life got more complex, and so my coping mechanisms became inadequate, and my ADHD in certain contexts was just so, it became a handbrake, it became a disability. And so with the amount of pressure that my life started to develop, the only way I could explain why I was the way I was, well, I'm just not a high capacity person. Well, I'm obviously just a bit useless. Like, I'm not as smart as I thought I was when I was younger. I am a mess. Like, I'm an inconvenience to my family. And that really started to take up so much space in my head, to the point where the combination of the undiagnosed ADHD and postpartum depression, I got to the place where I was like, you know what? My family would be better off without me. Like, I make things harder for them. They deserve someone who's got their shit together. But like, I just felt like, I am such a mess. Like, I was the glass in the kitchen. I was hurting other people.
Yeah.
I was so smashed up and messed up. And I was like, well, you know what? Fortunately, I reached out and asked for help. I got on some antidepressants. I started seeing a therapist. And a lot of that was because of my Christian techniques of pray harder, spend more time with Jesus, exercise, blah, blah, blah. Like, none of that worked. And I was like, okay. So those scars are still there. Like, when I drop the ball, I get overwhelmed. I forget to do stuff. I'm the mom who drops her kids off at school the day before school goes back, because I actually don't know what day it is. You know, I'm the one that, you know, is always texting the other moms, like, what are they supposed to bring? What were we supposed to do? You know, when I make mistakes, those little, those scars start to hurt. Like, and I have to be reminded that God is, again, His grace is going, Jess, you're enough. Like, the way your brain is wired is a gift. I made you this way. Like, you are not a problem. You are not a mistake. And so that before and after, that diagnosis was a big shift in terms of God rewriting the story of who I am and how I show up in the world.
That's so good, Jess. You were talking about that earlier, when it's your transition of, like, you're not working right now in Colorado, and there's this sense of identity and wrestling, like, who am I? And when you don't have a diagnosis, and even when you do have a diagnosis, there is this shift of trying to understand all these pieces. Now that you understand ADHD probably a little bit better than you did before, has it helped you connect with other people, helped with other moms or other people who have ADHD that were like, I feel like I'm less than right now?
Oh, absolutely. So I ended up writing a book called Empty Cages, Keys to Finding Freedom. And the premise is really like, accurate diagnoses lead to accurate solutions. When you know the name of your cage, then you can unlock the door. So I used ADHD as, you know, this is how I found freedom, but we need to name our cages, whether it's debt, financial, you know, issues, whether it's mental health or whatever it is. So telling that story in a, like, let's say a large group setting, or, you know, people come across it on social media, a lot of people resonate. They're like, oh yeah, you know, like, this is the name of my cage. This is the name of my cage. But the one thing that just blows me away every time is how many people come forward and say, I have an ADHD kid and now I understand. Or I have ADHD. Like, ADHD is grossly underdiagnosed in girls because it looks different to ADHD in boys. It's overdiagnosed in so many ways, and that's such a disservice to the people who actually do have neurodivergent brains. But telling the story of, you know, this is my before and after, this is my diagnosis, it's helped me feel like I'm not alone. I know it's helped a lot of people find the next step for their own struggle. And don't get me started basically, I could talk about ADHD for the next 2 hours if you like. It's such a passion project for me, which is a very ADHD thing to do, to get hyper focused and take a deep dive into something that you're excited about.
Yeah.
But it's built massive connection, massive community. And I love that. I think that's part of the healing.
Yeah, I think so too. You said, in the beginning, at the top of the show, we talked about, you're just like in this season of waiting, and you're growing in your patience. If you could fast forward 5 years and just think about like where God is leading you, what your hopes and dreams are. And I know sometimes that feels overwhelming, but what would that be for you? What would you, and maybe that is relationally, maybe that is professionally, maybe that's just personally what you're feeling in your spirit.
When I think about 5 years from now, I really do get excited. I'm starting a PhD program in the next month or two. And the way that it's structured, I'm so excited for the journey it's going to lead me down. I would love to be, in 5 years' time, I would love to be done that program, hopefully, not still trying to get that over the finish line. I'd love to be lecturing at a college, teaching, preaching more, writing more, and again, having ADHD means that I've had lots of exciting and sometimes disconnected projects and passions and kind of pursued these shiny things that catch my attention. Yeah. And I feel like this program is going to be able to pull them together and hopefully help me feel like, what? This is real. This is legitimate. I've connected the dots and found a niche where I am of service to other people and helping others with my weird and wonderful brain and the way that it works.
Well, we love your weird and wonderful brain here on the Parable Podcast. It has been a delight to talk to you, Jess. If people wanted to get connected to you or learn about your book, how can they do that?
I would say from a community point of view on Instagram. Okay. I have lots of Instagram DM friendships. And so I show up wherever you find me. I think I show up very much the same. Yeah. So I love to chat with people who I connect with on Instagram. And then my website, jessbasson.com, is more of like a resource-based place for books, for talks that I've done. And I hope that people who are maybe need or something's caught your imagination and you're like, ooh, I kind of need to know more about that. Yeah. The website's probably a good place to go and see where that would lead.
Fantastic. Jess, thank you so much for spending some time with us. We appreciate you being here.
You asked such great questions. And I really appreciate the way you've helped me share some of my story today. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think Jess did such a great job expressing her story in pictures to really help us hold on to these truths she shared today. To connect with Jess, simply visit daniellezapchenk.com for details. And here are 2 reflection questions from our time with her. Number 1, Jess talked about being in a forced maternity leave, kind of feeling of a holding pattern, if you will. If you feel like you are in that today, I would ask you just to really go to God and ask Him to provide some patience and direction in these next steps for you. And just try to continually discern His voice. Number 2, what broken piece are you holding on to? Maybe you're hoping for change. And so God might be saying, I'm just not done with that piece just yet. Just take some time to think about, maybe He is still working. I know our ever racing minds want everything to be done now, but maybe He's just not done yet. Also, huge shout out to my husband, Eric, for editing this podcast today. I am so grateful that you took the time to spend it with me. Remember, your parable showcases how God is with us through the monkey's mess and the waves of life. We'll see you back again next week on the Parable Podcast.